Awesome. Well, it is good to be here with everyone this morning, be able to share. It is actually a communion service today. So for those in the building, we do have some cups if you didn't get one of them on the way in. When it's up to the time of taking communion, if you put your hand up, they'll be passed around. And if you're joining us at home, you may wish to go and gather some things from your kitchen, something like that, to be able to share in communion together with us later on. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to come and speak and be able to share with you guys. And I'm actually really excited as well today because I'm going to do a bit of a proud uncle brag and introduce you to some of my nieces, which will be up on the screen. So you'll be able to see Holly, Aubrey and Brinny up there. They're my sister's kids. That's them with me on my birthday earlier this year. And I just wanted to introduce you to them. So you got Holly on the left screen, and she's the oldest. She's like incredibly smart for a kid. She's able to grab concepts well beyond her years and come up with phrases and use words in context that she shouldn't be able to. And I think at times her vocabulary is actually more extensive than mine is. She's awesome. She's a bundle of energy. And then you've got Aubrey in the middle, and Aubrey's like the crazy child, the middle child, and she's always going, no fear, anything like that. She's the sort of kid that just bounces, and with her energy sometimes can use that for mischief, which I get along with really well and can relate to a lot. And then we've got Brinny, who's just a little baby. She's really cute and growing, and just the other day learnt to bounce in her bouncer properly. And they're really awesome to hang out with. I love spending time with my nieces, and with that, they're all very different personalities as well. And my sister was telling me a story just the other day about an incident where their cat actually caught a rat and brought a rat into their house, which doesn't sound very fun at all, does it? And the rat got into the kids' toy room, and Holly's just freaking out. I think the rat ran over her foot at one point, and she's like freaking out. My sister's kind of thrown the cat in there again to catch the rat, and they've shut the door, and then Aubrey comes trundling up and opens the door and puts her soft tiger in and said, "I'm just putting my toys in there to help catch the rat," and just closes the door again. They're a bundle of energy, the kids, and they get along really well. They play together really well. But if you ever spend time with kids, right, it doesn't take long when they're playing together and stuff like that you end up hearing the phrase that it's not fair. Yeah, you've heard that? You can relate to that? You've had kids around they want to play with their toys and playing together and it doesn't go their way, and they're like, it's not fair, this is what I want. Or it's time to go, or they need to go to bed and it's not fair, and then they're 17 and they've got chores to do and they want to go with their friends and you say they can't, and you're like, this isn't fair, you're not fair. Kids, this phrase resonates, that it's not fair. Yeah? The passage that we're going to be looking at today in Isaiah comes after a period of exile. And for the nation of Israel, they're stamping their feet at this point going, it's not fair. And you see in Isaiah up to chapter 39, there's this call that they need to change the way that they're operating or they're going to face judgment. And this judgment comes in the form of exile and oppression from another nation, the nation of Babylon. And at 39, this call of judgment comes to fulfillment. And then 70 years passes, and we're in this new section in the book of Isaiah, where after 70 years of exile, the Israelites start to come back. And this is a time when they're in exile, they've got three choices before them. Firstly, they could fight back against those that are oppressing them, or they could become like those that oppress them. They could fight against Babylon, or they could become like Babylon. Or there was a third way that they could choose to live, which they could seek to live for God and seek the welfare of the nation that was oppressing them. This is the choices they've had, and they've just gone through 70 years of hardship, wrestling through this. And now they're beginning to return. But as they return, they're realizing that their people, their customs, their traditions, their security and their faith have been obliterated. Everything that they knew or their parents knew have been destroyed. And they begin to cry out that this is not fair. This is not fair. We want justice. We need justice to return to our lands, and we need justice to return to our way of life. What I need justice. And this passage that we're looking at this morning from Isaiah 42 is a passage that is centered around this idea of justice. And for us in our world today, in the Bible, first we see an obsession of justice in this passage, but in our world today, in our Judeo-Christian cultures like Australia and the Western cultures, we obsess over this idea of justice. Justice is a pivotal value for our society. And in fact, in the last week, I was away on a leaders retreat with the Baptist Union with other pastors. And at one point, they asked us if there was one thing that gets under our skin or one thing that we could change in the world, what would it be? And almost unanimously was the call to change the injustice that is in our world. But this idea of justice doesn't just exist inside church contexts or faith communities. You see, in our broader society, we're obsessed with justice as well. And if we cast our mind back over some of the biggest issues that have been in the news in the last few years, and if I think back just over a year ago, we could see the call for justice for the women that were walking through the parks in our society and the abuse that would come to them throughout our city. And there were vigils being held, and broader societies putting these on, people turning out because they're going, this is not right. We need justice. Or in other parts of our country at the moment, and for a long time, we've been seeing a call for the deaths in custody, particularly as it relates to our First Nation people and the disproportionate amount of them who die inside our judicial system. And people crying out saying, we need justice. Also in society, if we're looking in the news at the moment and what society's calling out for, we can see the Tamil asylum seeker family with the young girl who's sick and the wrestle between what happens with should their visas aren't valid, should they stay, should they go, and there's these two sides for a call of justice. Even inside our own families, we might have heard the phrase, like, you can do what you want to me, but if you touch my family, there was a call for justice. When people hurt us, we want justice. And at the heart of all of us, inside all of us, is this thing that we want things to be made right. We want things to be made right. We see what's happening to us or to others, and something just doesn't sit right with us. Where we feel like we've been jibbed or hard done by, or things weren't done the way we want it to be done, and we demand it to be different. We demand it to be better. We demand for it to be made right. So the question that sat with me as I was looking at this is, what is justice? What does justice mean? What is justice? And firstly, when we look at justice, when we see the word, there's a call to action. Justice, to have justice, there needs to be an action. And I was thinking back about this and where this relates in my life, and I can remember this period when I was in high school, when I was in year 11, and I was a moral student, I was a bad student at times. I was in the grade student, and one of the best classes I loved was English class. There's a couple of things that I remember from English class. I remember going into class once in year 11 and telling my teacher I was going to sleep that class. And my teacher said, well, you got work to do. I said, no, I'm going to sleep. And I curled up under my desk and went to sleep. Or another time, the teacher was fantastic. It was one of my favorite lessons. I said that it was too nice outside to be inside the classroom that day. And I didn't want to come in. So my teacher moved the whole class and set the classroom up outside and proceeded to teach the lesson. But the number one thing that stuck with me from my English class was a quote that was written on the wall. And you might have heard it. It was the quote that she had written there was, the smallest deed is better than the greatest intention. The smallest deed that you do is is better than the greatest intention that you have. And that's the thing with justice. It demands action. For there to be justice, something has to be done. All the sentiment or words or condolences that happen are nice. They're good things. But for justice to prevail, something has to change. However, the problem is that we find in our society, if we look at how we demand justice, as people, we often flatline the similarity between justice and anger and revenge. You've hurt me, therefore I need to get you back. And if we get you back, then that is justice. And I love playing soccer, right? I was trying to think of how this plays out. And I love playing soccer. And I can think of some clear examples where justice was sought on a soccer pitch. Even the other week, I was playing against this side, and they were better than us, and faster than us, and more skillful than us, and we were beating them 3-0, because we were playing better as a side, and their best player, skill-wise, got the ball and was lining up for a shot, And I managed to strip the ball off his feet and start to run away. And in that moment, he decided to get some justice. And that justice was served by a slide tackle through my ankle. Justice was sought by taking my foot out and slightly dislocating my foot in the process. But justice was sought. He got back. And this is how the world most typifies justice. You have wronged me. You have hurt me. You've impacted me. Therefore, you must pay. I must get you back. And this idea, the way this is summed up, the concept is what's called a zero-sum game, which means for me to win, you must lose. For the wolf to live, the sheep must die. Or for the person A to get a promotion, they must get the credit, and they can't even give a sense of it to person B, because if person B gets credit, then they might rise up and take my promotion off me. Justice is only found when I regain my rightful position on top, unhindered and unrestrained. And when that's reached, we've got justice. However, is this how God views justice? Because I'm thinking through that, well, is that how God views justice? That's how we seek justice. But is that how God views it? You see, like for Israel at the time, for justice for them, that meant freedom from exile. It meant judgment against those who oppressed them. It meant reinstatement of their culture that had been taken from them, reinstatement of their identity, a rebuilding of their temple, of their way of life. For them, justice meant that they were at the center. However, God's view of justice is a little bit bigger than this, isn't it? See, I want to read through the passage in Isaiah 42 with us together. It'll be up on the screens. And as we read through, I want you to look at God's view of justice as it comes through this. So we're going to read from Isaiah 42 verse 1 and the first 9 verses. It says, "Behold my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I've put my spirit upon him, and he'll bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be discouraged till he's established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law. Thus says the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives birth to the people on it and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I'll take you by the hand and keep you. I'll give you a covenant for the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes of the blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prisons those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord. That is my name. My glory I'll give to no other, nor praise to a carved idol. Behold, the former things have come to pass. A new thing I now declare. Before they spring forth, I am telling you them." See, God's view of justice is a little bit more holistic than me at the center. It's unifying for all people, for all nations. You see, God's solution is, yes, I can free you from exile. I can restore you. I can restore you because you're my people, but I'm also bringing justice for my people in all the nations. I'm going to save them from their idols. I'm going to save them from the things that distract and pull them away. He wants to bring justice to all. And we can see this clearly in chapter 42, verse 1, where he says, "Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I've put my spirit upon him, and he'll bring justice to the nations." Not just to Israel, but to the nations. And this word behold that's used at the start here, this is actually a play on words, because as Matt went through the passage last week in chapter 41, in the last verse of that finishes saying, "Behold their idols," and it uses the exact same phrase. Behold their idols, who are nothing but empty metal, images that are blowing in the wind. But God's servant, in contrast, is full of God's Spirit. He'll bring forth justice to the nations. Here are these idols that the nations hold on to that just blow in the wind. There's nothing there. But here is God's servant who is full of spirit, who can bring justice and will bring justice. There's a play on words here as he seeks to save the nations from their idols, because God's view of justice is bigger than any injustice or circumstance of a single situation. It's further reaching than Judah and the exile to all nations, and he's seeking to address the root of where injustice comes from. And for us to understand this, we need to understand the whole story, because the idea of injustice actually ties right back to the very beginning. And this is what he's talking about in this passage. It ties back to Genesis 3, where you see the humans are faced with a choice. Are they going to accept God's definition of what is good, what is right? Or are they going to seize autonomy for themselves and seek to define what is good for them? And if you know the story, they chose to seek autonomy and choose to form what is good in their own eyes. And as a result, they create idols out of this, because these idols, if I do the right thing, if I can get them to do the right thing, then they will bless me and do what I want, and then I can get what I want, and that's good. Even if it's not good for someone else, it's good for me, and that is a good thing, because I'm defining what is good for me. And even if I need to harm you to get what is good for me, that's good, because I'm now in a good position. And what you think doesn't matter, because at least I'm getting what is good, except if you're on the receiving end, because then that's no longer good for you. And then you're trying to get what's good for you, even if that person's harming you. And it plays against each other, and we get this wrestle where injustice is born. And as a result, if we have that mindset, we get in a position where we're happy to destroy anyone that gets in our way of defining what is good for me. You see, God's view of justice has to be bigger than the circumstance, because it plays into this narrative. Because if he gives freedom to only some, very quickly that freedom can shift from being free to this idea of a self-preserving freedom, a self-interested freedom, where I need to protect the freedom that I have, and quickly I need to protect myself against you who is trying to take my freedom away, and then I become the oppressor of you. And the cycle starts again. For me to win, you must lose. And that's not God's way of justice. So how is God going to bring about justice? And if we glean through this passage together, let's draw out a couple of key points that we can see about how God brings justice and how it's different to us. Firstly, we can see that justice is brought with gentleness and tenderness, as opposed to him seeking justice out of anger and revenge. And I love how the Message transliteration puts it together. If we look through it, it says, he won't call to attention what he does with loud speeches or gaudy parades. He won't brush aside the bruised and the hurt. He won't disregard the small and the insignificant, but steadily and firmly he sets things right. He won't tire out and quit. He won't be stopped until he finishes his work to set things right on the earth. When God moves to bring justice, it's not done the same way that we do, but rather he does it out of gentleness. He does it where he won't brush aside those who have been hurt. He won't trample on them. He won't disregard those who are small and insignificant. But the posture he holds is one who is tender, who is mild, who's caring and loving, is gentle and restorative. See, when God brings about justice, he does it in a way that he can bring justice without destroying others, but restoring them. And this justice, in the second point, we can see it's good for all, not just for some. So it says he faithfully will bring forth justice, and he will not grow faint or be discouraged till this has been established, till justice has been established in the earth. In his teachings, the islands will put their hope. This justice extends beyond the border of Israel to all the nations, to all the islands, to those who belong to us and to those who oppose us. See, justice extends to those that we understand and those that we don't understand. Justice extends to those who are like us and those who aren't like us, to those who we like and those who we hate. Justice extends to those who are oppressed and to the oppressors. When God brings about his justice, he brings justice about for all, not just for some, not elevating some above others, but restoring everything. And the main point we can see from this passage is that this justice is brought about by his servant, by a person. And while this remains a mystery at the time that this passage was first spoken, it becomes evident as we go on that this person it's referring to, it is a servant of Israel, is inevitably going to be the Jewish Messiah, the liberator, the one who will ultimately set all things right. And if we read from verse 5, again in the Message transliteration, it says this, and I love the imagery of it. It says that this servant, he'll breathe life into earth's people, making them alive with his own life, saying, I am God, I've called you to live right and well. I've taken responsibility for you, kept you safe. I've set you among my people to bind them to me, to provide you as a lighthouse to the nations, to make a start at bringing people into the open, into light, opening blind eyes, releasing prisoners from the dungeons, emptying dark prisons. I am God, that's my name. I don't franchise my glory. I don't endorse the no God idols. Take note that earlier predictions of judgment have been fulfilled, but I'm announcing the new salvation work. Before it bursts onto the scene, I am telling you about it. And for us, this servant, we understand it to be Jesus himself. We can continue to read in the subsequent chapters of Isaiah as it continues to point more and more imagery to things that Jesus fulfills in his life. See, God's justice will be brought about through the life and ministry of Jesus, and it was. And how do we know this? Because Jesus testifies to it himself. See, in Matthew 12, from verse 14, Jesus uses this exact passage to announce what he is doing. Because the Pharisees, they went out to conspire against him, to conspire how to destroy him. And Jesus, being aware of this, withdrew from there. And many followed them, and he healed them all. And ordered them to not make him known, because this was done to fulfill what the prophet Isaiah had said, this passage we're looking at. Behold, my servant whom I've chosen, my beloved with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, upon Jesus, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smouldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. We can see it clear in Jesus' character that this passage is talking about him when we look at how he lived and how he ministered. Because Jesus was gentle with those who were outcast and hurting. He breathed life into all people, all nations, regardless of their ethnicity. He walked among people to draw them and bind them back to God, and continues today with that work of being a lighthouse to the nations, of showing his message and showing God to the nations. And he started to bring people into the light, opening their eyes and setting them free. And he wrought a new salvation for those who follows him. This is how God ultimately brings about justice. And as we've covered, that this injustice exists in our world because it's found when people seek to define what is good for themselves. When they define what is good for me over what is good for you, not choosing what God says is good. And then in the pursuit of that goodness that we're seeking, our definition of good, we cause injustice to each other. We cause injustice to God because we don't go with what he defines as good. And another way to refer to injustice in this sense is sin. And this sin plagues every single one of us, everyone, as we define and pursue what is good in our own eyes, in our own standards, rather than what God says. And Jesus, being the model of perfection, the one who in no way was self-seeking, but loved and begun a process of making all things new and restored, Jesus did the ultimate sacrifice of laying his life down. He laid it down as a peace offering to take onto himself all the sin, all the shame, all the scorn that was caused by all injustice of all time. And he descended to the depths and rose victorious over sin to set things new. Paul puts it like this. He says that God presents Jesus as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood. He did this to demonstrate his justice because in the forbearance he left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. And he did this to demonstrate his justice at the present time so he could be just and the one who justifies. For God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And if we count ourselves to be united with him in his death, we certainly will be united with him in his resurrection. For we know that our old self was crucified with him, so that the body of sin might be done away with, and the life that we live now can be lived for God, lived free of injustice. See, in Jesus offering himself, he beats this thing called a zero-sum game. Because he says, I'm willing to lose. I'm willing to lay myself down so you can win without destroying me. And because I choose to do that willingly, I win as well. Because I get to raise you up and see you lifted up. And he calls us to do the same. That if we live life that way, then justice is fulfilled. If we live our lives with the same love, through the same tenderness and gentleness, and we can sacrifice ourselves so others can win, and lay ourselves down, then they can win without destroying us, and that breaks the game. Where we can be the first to love, to serve, to sacrifice. And if we define that as greatness and winning, and we lay ourselves down, justice is sought. This is the good news. This is how God restores the earth. This is how God transforms in justice. And it can be easy as we look at Jesus and go, oh, that I can see how he does it, but that's Jesus. It's like he's God. Like that. How does that look in my own life? And if you remember a few years ago, there used to be a bracelet called WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? When it comes to justice, and if we want to look at it in a more tangible way, I think probably a better way to ask is, what would someone like Martin Luther King Jr. do? Because he was a champion of justice. And in the light of the immense injustice he faced, he called for a justice based on a non-violent response, a response based on respect. Where instead of raising arms to fight back, he called the oppressors to come to the table and see what is happening. Where there was a call to listen and to see. A call for unity and restoration as a whole. See, in his mind, the ultimate expression of justice was not to pay back what had been done, but the ultimate expression of justice was that the sons of slaves and the sons of slave owners could sit down at a table together and fellowship. See, justice is found when those who are hurt work together to help to be a lighthouse of hope for the nations. Justice is found when they work together for a covenant of healing for all, where the lion can lay down with the lamb. The sons of slave owners and the sons of slaves can share a table of mutuality and respect. This is God's justice. A justice that's available for all, and a justice that comes through his servant. But for it to begin, it has to start with ourselves. And now we're going to take communion together in light of this justice. And this begins by acknowledging that justice begins with the acknowledgement that we are broken. That for each of us, we define what is good in our own eyes and for ourselves, and that this is a cause of injustice in our world. But Jesus in tenderness calls us to respond to him. He says, come to me, those who are weary, and I'll give you rest. I'll give you healing, transformation. See, he's the one who won't brush aside the bruised and the hurting, won't disregard the small and the insignificant. But he wants to breathe life into all people, making them alive with his own life. And he did that on the cross, which we're going to remember now. So if you've got your bread and juice and cups here, if you don't have one of those here, put your hand up and they'll bring it round. If you need one here, if you're in your home, you might want to get these together as we share. As those are coming around. You see, with the bread, I'm going to actually open it first. With the bread, what we see is that Jesus, in laying his life down in brokenness, he takes the brokenness into himself. Jesus willingly sacrifices his body to be broken so that our brokenness can be restored. That we are broken in that together. So I want to invite you, just as Jesus did on the night before he was betrayed, he took bread and broke it, saying, this is my body which I lay down for you. Eat this in remembrance of me. Let's eat this in remembrance of Jesus, and our body's broken. Then Jesus took a cup of wine, a cup of juice. He said, "This cup represents my blood, for it's in the blood that the life of a being dwells. I'm going to pour out my life for you so that you can take my life upon yourself and be restored." Just as in this passage it says he breathes life into all, he did that by laying his life down. So together as a community, let's drink and acknowledge the new life that he brings. And as the worship band comes and joins us back up on stage, I want to finish this time of reflection as we go into a song of praise with the commission that Jesus was given. Not the Matthew commission, but the John one, where he says, "Just as the Father sent me, so now I am sending you." Just as God sent him as the servant to bring justice to the nations, so God now, Jesus now, is sending us as the source of new life and hope for our world. Let's pray and then worship together. Father, I thank you for Jesus. I thank you for the love that you showed through him as he comes and walks on this world, but not in a way of revenge and anger, but a way of justice that's done out of tenderness and gentleness. A way that you bring justice that restores all people and all nations to you, not in the way that we think it should be done, but the way you do it, in alignment to your character as the God who restores with hope and transformation. That you are the God who makes all things new. And I thank you for the work of Jesus in doing that in our lives, amongst us as a community, and through us to the world around us. We pray for more of your Spirit in us as you lead us into that transforming work for our world.